climate change, greenhouse gases, the Paris Accords, and the Green New Deal. We hear these terms thrown around a lot today as we continue to wrestle with the question of an ever-changing climate and an ever-changing economy. But what impact do these resolutions have on our economy, small businesses, and our families? I'm joined tonight by Representative Gordon Denlinger of the National Federation of Independent Business in Pennsylvania to discuss those questions and more. All of that coming up right here, right now. I'm Sam Chen, and this is Face the Issues. Good evening and welcome to Face the Issues. I'm your host, Sam Chen. Climate change. It's a topic discussed on every major media outlet and has become somewhat of a buzzword. We've seen proposals like the Green New Deal from Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. And recently in Pennsylvania, Governor Tom Wolf joined the U.S. Climate Alliance. There's a lot of talk of President Trump pulling out of the Paris Climate Accords, but what does it all mean? What are the resolutions being proposed? Do they work? And what's the impact on the economy, on small businesses, and our communities and families like yours? I'm joined tonight by Representative Gordon Denlinger of the National Federation of Independent Business in Pennsylvania. Representative Denlinger, welcome back to the show.
Thank you, Sam. Great to be here.
Thank you for always taking the time to be here. You are a favorite guest. Our viewers love you. We love you here at the station.
Love the conversation. Always the good issues are presented.
Appreciate you coming and doing this with us. Let's talk about climate change. Big topic. It dominates almost every news cycle. It's either something the president has tweeted or it's climate change, it seems. And there are a lot of different proposals that are thrown around, both nationally, in Pennsylvania, in different states. Different people have different approaches to it. One of the things I want to clarify before we even get started is that when we look at these issues, there is the climate change side of it, where people are talking about the science, they're talking about how the climate is acting, they're talking about things like global warming and natural disasters. There is the resolution side, where we are seeing the proposals like the Paris Accords, the U.S. Climate Alliance, the Green New Deal, and the different proposals that either federally or statewide are being made to solve the climate questions. But then there's also an impact side, which how do these proposals impact our businesses, our economy, our families? Let me just start 30,000 foot level. You've been a member of the state legislature for a dozen years. How do you see that those three parts play together? And as a legislator, how do you even begin to wrestle with something like that?
Well, it's a huge issue, as you highlight, and Sam, you know, these issues are bigger than any one of us, certainly, but there are impacts, as you say, all up and down the line. To the science side of it, you know, I do believe there are human impacts to climate. I probably am a little more on the conservative side to say I think maybe those are overstated. I'm certainly a conservationist, so clean water, clean air, you know, stewardship of the environment is something I think we should take a look at and be involved in. But you know, the more extreme side of this sort of pits the conservationist against the sort of extremist environmentalist side, and so there lies the debate, and how do these ideas work their way into public policy, state, federal, and then there's the personal side, as you mentioned, you know, businesses, people's lives, how they live day to day, and really the future of our society. You know, it runs the gamut from folks who believe that, you know, we're just 10 years away from cataclysm, to the idea that this is, you know, the farther right would say this is the shiny object to take our mind off the idea that our essential freedoms and liberties are being destroyed, and this is about control. So within the public policy sphere, down in Harrisburg, in DC, you hear both sides presented, and so it's a key debate for our time.
I like the way you broke that down. Let me ask you this. Obviously, you always hear the terms that climate change is a hoax, or there are climate change deniers, or so forth and so forth. You talked about conservationism earlier, and the idea that even if you are, quote unquote, more on the conservative end of this debate, and there are plenty of Republicans who are very much in that environmentalist climate change, we have to fix this realm. But generally speaking, those on the more conservative end, you mentioned that there is still a desire, a drive, a call in your mind that we need to preserve clean air and clean water, that we need to do our part, as you said, to steward the environment and steward the planet, our home. There's a lot of debate over what causes climate change, how much involvement humans have, and so forth and so forth. Mm-hmm. Is it fair to say that there should be at least some agreement that as humans we have a responsibility, wherever we stand on this issue, to be actively working to preserve our home planet?
You know, Sam, as I worked in the assembly for 6 terms, almost 12 years, it was fairly universal. Mm-hmm. Folks believing that we need to take steps forward toward a cleaner environment. I never heard anyone arguing for, dirty water, dirty air. There was, I think, a huge view within Pennsylvania, particularly to the idea that we're a legacy industrial state.
Okay.
There are still slag piles left over from the earlier times, coal, steel, and all of that. And we are actively working to clean these things up. Mm-hmm. And so that, I think, is exciting. Mine reclamation, limestone blocks in water coming out of abandoned mines, things of that sort to deal with acidity. So dealing with legacy issues is there, but nearly universal support for environmental cleanliness. Mm-hmm. But then you get beyond that into the human-caused climate change globally. That is a whole other level.
Is it, and I don't want you to put words in other legislators' mouths, but is there some sense in which the extremists on this, the ones who say the world's going to be over in a decade, and the ones who say that this entire thing is a hoax that the Democrat Party invented in order to distract the world, is there some sense in that that's really a political ploy?
Yes. Frankly, there is a concern that, and I would say Representative Darrell Metcalfe, who's chairman of the Environmental Committee in the House, is very vocal on the idea that this really is more about taking control and limiting personal freedom. And you look at AOC and the Green New Deal and you say, well, wow, I mean, the lives that we basically live in homes, driving vehicles, going to work, having jobs, these things almost are unsustainable under the outreaches of the Green New Deal.
Sure.
And drive that down into state policy. At NFIB, we had a small business day recently where the Democratic chairman of the Environmental Committee said we have 11 years left before we're all done. So, some of that scarism works its way in, and is that really just about control? Yeah. I admit to some concerns in that area.
Sure. Let me ask you broadly, when we discuss these issues, like you said earlier, there's the climate issue, the science issue itself. Then it's a whole different topic when we talk about what solutions we're proposing. And we look at those proposed solutions, such as the U.S. Climate Alliance, the Green New Deal, and how they impact us on a regular, everyday level. And the reason I think that's important is we're talking about preserving the environment as important because it is important to our future and important to our kids and our families, our communities, our businesses. But if we eliminate them economically, then there is really no reason to preserve the future environmentally, and vice versa. If we eliminate our planet environmentally, there's really no purpose in having tax breaks for people that won't be here in 50 years. So toward that end, what concerns do you have? You work with small businesses across the state of Pennsylvania. What concerns do you have with some of these proposals that we see either nationally or coming from the governor's mansion in Harrisburg?
Well, there's a sense that by some in the environmental lobby that business is the great evil and it's the place to reach for every nickel and dime related to all of this.
Corporate greed, right?
Corporate greed. So they're business owners from mom and pop at the corner deli all the way up to U.S. Steel and the other folks, the majors, are the big bad enemy. And in fact, they're the people that give us the family sustaining jobs that really enable us to live life at a very basic level. And so I think that is out of balance to some degree. But to your broader comment, these plans at all levels, federal and state, generally are zeroing in on greenhouse gas emissions and carbon. carbon dioxide and the emissions there. So, as we wrestle with these policy points, business does emit greenhouse gases, and so that becomes the go-to. But the solutions then become tax, regulate, control, and at some point, businesses can't survive if you get further into that scenario.
Sure. The Governor Wolf of Pennsylvania recently entered the U.S. Climate Alliance. A number of governors across the country have, and this was their way of trying to take their state in to replace the Paris Accords,
yes,
which President Trump pulled us out of. What does the U.S. Climate Alliance entail?
Well, it again goes back to greenhouse gas emissions and sources of energy, how we're producing that. It's a big push toward renewables, of course, wind and solar. Interesting debates going on right now about nuclear.
Okay.
It is a carbon-free source of energy, but does that count as worthy of subsidies and credits under the renewable sort of umbrella? So that's a current Harrisburg debate that's significant in and around the now announced closure of 3 Mile Island, TMI.
What is the issue with nuclear? Is it why is that so controversial?
Well, the left has never quite gotten past, I have a little gray hair here, so the sort of nuclear freeze, all nuke is bad,
sure,
mantra of the late 70s,
sure,
early 80s. And so to come around and embrace it, even though it is acknowledged as a carbon-free source of energy, it's just very difficult for some people on the far left. That said, there's an economic equation in and around nuclear generation. We have 5 nuke plants in the state. 1 has announced closure. They're probably all coming to the end of their economic life. The question is, under the renewables standards, should they receive the same credit, the same subsidy, if you will, subsidized through ratepayers that the other sources achieve? We get more than 40, I think it's about 42% of our power is from nuclear at this point in the state. Natural gas, is on the way up. So that's a strong player now, and that's basically what's making nuclear not economically viable.
Sure.
But it's, both sources much cleaner than the coal that they replaced. Though with scrubbing technology, that can be mitigated. But all parts of the portfolio of energy.
That's great. Don't go away. We'll be right back after these messages. Welcome back to Face the Issues. Representative Denlinger, thank you again for being here, for taking the time. We're having this great conversation about climate change, the resolutions that are being proposed both federally and at state levels, as well as the impact on the economy, small businesses, and families. One of the things that we left off talking about was the U.S. Climate Alliance, and specifically its target on greenhouse gases. And that was what the Paris Accords targeted. That's what the Kyoto Treaty had targeted back in the early 2000s. In Pennsylvania, where you serve as the state director for the National Federation of Independent Business, Governor Wolf, in his second term now, he signed an executive order that puts us in the U.S. Climate Alliance. And among other things, it states that it will reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 26% by the year 2025, which is just 6 years from now, and 80% by the year 2050. Now, he's been criticized on the right and the left for this. Those on the right think this is too aggressive. Those on the left have accused him of essentially doing nothing. Let me ask you, from a business standpoint, does this impact the small businesses that are members of your organization? How does it impact that? And then I think more importantly, how does the community feel the impact of this?
To achieve those levels, which as you say are in line with the Paris Accord, you're talking about significant impacts to manufacturing, electric generation, and transportation. And as far as the specific changes that would have to occur, we do know in the transportation sector, significant steps are being made in the vehicle production, the move to EVs. It would probably almost force us to make the switch to EVs. That's probably going to happen anyway. So the governor might be latching on to something that's starting down the rails already. EVs are connected, of course, to power plants. Power plants can be scrubbed. and there's sort of the push toward renewables generation of electricity. We got into the nuclear a little in the last segment. That would contribute to those numbers. Nuclear generation would be acceptable under that scenario. So, the 26% that you mentioned, we're probably not totally out of that zone, so the left would criticize that as not being aggressive enough.
Sure.
Related to that. The 80% further out becomes much more hard to, I guess, conceptualize.
Sure.
At some point, moving, at 80%, you're on your path to zero emissions, and at that point, life would have to dramatically change for citizens. You'll have no, internal combustion engines anywhere in your world anymore. You won't be cooking on a barbecue grill, on your patio anymore. I mean, no more fireplace. There's just all kinds of things that we do that contribute to those generations of those gases.
So when they say greenhouse gas emissions, I mean, we all think automobiles and those factories from the Industrial Revolution. What produces greenhouse gas emissions when we look at our communities, our small businesses, things like that?
Really, any combustion. So the internal combustion engine, which interestingly, Mercedes-Benz has announced they will stop doing R&D on the internal combustion engine in another, I think, 2 years.
Wow.
So that type of engine is coming to the end of its life cycle. More challenging probably is the heavy vehicles, like the trucks that are all over our highways. But that whole thing is switching over. But within our homes, we all most heat with perhaps natural gas, fuel oil. Radical changes on that would be problematic under the emissions regimen. Within industry, it's as complicated as the blast furnaces in United States Steel and the McDonald's down the street that grills hamburgers and releases, into the atmosphere. So it's all up and down the chain there on commerce. And business, I think, needs to be given some credit. A lot of improvements have been made in trying to clean things up. But when you get to that last, piece of it, you're spending amazing amounts of dollars to get very little amounts of gain. And is it really resulting in better health, a better environment? I think that's very questionable.
Let me ask you on that question, because the counter argument is, well, isn't the reduction of greenhouse gas good? Isn't moving to renewable energy a good thing? And you see businesses trying to do this on their own. I mean, that's the counter argument to it.
It is, however, there is, of course, a lot of science that would indicate that carbon dioxide in the atmosphere is necessary for plant growth, and that if we get, there are literally benefits that we're seeing within, food sources and so forth from some level of carbon dioxide, that it literally could cut ag production, and we could see struggles to provide food for people. So there's kind of the other side of the totally clean environment. There's naturally occurring carbon dioxide as well. That's going to be there. So, again, reasonable steps. Take a look, but at the extrapolations of the far out there, probably not worth the expenditures.
Let me ask you a little bit. I mean, we talked earlier. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez suggested in her Green New Deal that 12 years is the time period that we have. State Representative, you said it's about 10 to 11 years. A lot of these predictions are going on there. What are the Green New Deal, the Climate Alliance, the Paris Accords, a lot of this deals with greenhouse gas. One of the leading things that we see over and over and over again is this idea called cap and trade.
Yes.
Could you briefly explain what cap and trade is, and how does this impact our businesses and our economy?
It's very interesting, and I'm obviously conservative of a little bit older time frame, and it actually, cap and trade came out of the Reagan White House.
It was a Republican idea.
It was. Boyd and Gray was an attorney within the Reagan White House who tried to inject some free market concepts into a regimen that would result in environmental improvement. The specific target in those times was acid rain, and viewers will remember when power plants were, putting forth pollutants which were literally destroying our forests. The whole acid rain scenario was very damaging. So the solution to that was, let's put a cap at a certain level, and then every year that cap will be reduced. But underneath that, those companies that invest in clean technology such that they don't pollute as much will be able to sell allowances or credits to those industries who do still pollute and need to get coverage to avoid fines and fees. That's the trading system. Okay. And it's really kind of a spur to invest in cleaner technology. And Sam, it worked. When you look at the whole acid rain scenario,
sure.
We don't hear about it as much anymore, or hardly at all, because the cap and trade system was effective. Now, the question is, should that be swung over onto the carbon dioxide emissions, greenhouse gas? But it is a Republican idea at its genesis, and arguably was effective for acid rain.
Do you see that potentially as working on the carbon emission side? Or is there too much of an impact on, again, we talk about balance, where if we eliminate these private businesses under heavy tax, then people aren't going to have their livelihoods anyway. Is this within that balance, or how do we work that?
It's certainly a thing to take a look at, and Governor Wolf is, and we'll get into discussions of his moves here, but there is an attempt at, there's something called an 11-state plus District of Columbia compact that the governor has basically signed a letter that we will take a look at it, of joining that northeastern state compact to implement some state-level cap-and-trade type system. So to your question, can it be effective? Yes, it absolutely can. Is it going to be worth the expenditures that go into it? I would have some questions about that, but those who believe that we are, 11 or 10 years or 12, whatever the number is, away from, the end of time,
right?
They're going to be for that.
Sure.
I totally get it.
Sure. Well, don't go away. We'll come back and discuss those plans right after this. Welcome back to Face the Issues. Representative Denlinger, great conversation on climate change, the solutions, and how this impacts business. We've talked a lot about Governor Wolf recently joining the U.S. Climate Alliance, as well as kind of looking at this cap and trade idea. This is not something the governor pushed in his first term. Second term, he wins re-election 2018. 2018 obviously is also when the likes of Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and that more progressive wing come in and start pushing this. Do you see that as some impact on the governor's agenda, or where do you see the governor's overall agenda moving?
He's clearly pivoted into the environmental realm here within the last short period of time, signing up to the U.S. Climate Alliance when he had previously indicated he felt that was worthless symbolism.
Right.
So he's taken some steps, and I think that's probably to satisfy some on the left who've been critical of him on environmental issues. And it's probably also a point of legacy for him. He would say, if I leave the state moving toward a cleaner future, that's important for him and his viewpoint. It is probably a place to go for a gentleman that's been called the most liberal governor in America, because tax and spend agenda issues have not succeeded for him, getting them through the assembly on a broad basis. Right. So it's a place to go.
Against him on that.
Indeed, and even the severance tax that he's promoted, fifth time's a charm. He brings it up every year, and it's still dead on arrival because Democrats in the western and northern tier will not support it.
Well, toward that end, wouldn't Democrats in the western and northern tier, in steel country and the coal country, have issues with the cap and trade policy?
I would think they would. It's interesting. The comment is made that Republicans in the Southeast poll more liberal in viewpoint than Democrats do in the north and the west of Pennsylvania. So
probably true.
Those lines cross over a little bit. But really, when you get to the north and west, Democrats and Republicans are very conservative. Working class folks. Steel mill and union and the Steelers and the Pirates, those are the things that they focus on.
Which is interesting. We've talked a lot when you're on the show about some of these unholy alliances that kind of cross parties. Last time it was Bernie Sanders and President Trump. This one, unions, I can't imagine labor unions tending to be very friendly towards Green New Deal ideas.
They are not, and there's concern that when jobs are always an issue, that some of these policies are going to just really crunch industrial capacity.
Sure.
And I mentioned U.S. Steel, the other steel producers, that there's a problem coming, and there is certainly within the Democratic Party a conflict right now between unionism and socialism.
Sure.
We see that as a big issue. So.
Right. Where do you see we getting something done on both preserving our environment but also supporting our small businesses and our communities?
It's at the level of what's reasonable and doable, and I think measuring cost, impact to people's lives in cost dollars, you'll get people to come along if they feel they can afford it, and it will actually get something done.
That's great. Representative Denlinger, thank you so much.
Good to be with you, Sam.
Good to have you here. That is all the time we have tonight. Thank you so much for tuning in, and join us again next week as we unpack another issue. Until then, you can continue this conversation online. Just use the hashtag #FaceTheIssues. My name is Sam Chen. On behalf of all of us here at Face the Issues, thank you and good night.